So we're going to continue now, Chelek Dalid of Derech Hashem. Like I said, I'm not feeling 100%, so I might go a little bit shorter than usual. So we'll see. Okay, so we began last week Chelek Dalid. Chelek Dalid begins with the introduction of explaining to us that this is going to be about our avoda. It's going to be about the way that we serve Hashem and how our avoda, how the way that the things that we do in the service of Hashem, how does that affect the master plan, the way that everything is supposed to be happening, the way that we explained at the beginning of the Sefer. So he said to us that the mitzvos are set up in such a way that they create shlemus and push away chisaron. And specifically, the one mitzvah that he wanted to get into first, which we began last week, was specifically the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, the mitzvah of learning Torah, and how that mitzvah, more than any other mitzvah, has the opportunity, the ability to create shlemus in a person, and there's also different levels. Just like there's different levels of Torah, different levels of a person's entry into and dealing with Torah. Like there's just simply saying the words, like we said, just like reading the words of Tehillim or reading the Psukim, and that's already taking something. We're going to see more of that from tonight. That's already taking the Dvar Hashem and like bringing it into the world. However, the deeper that a person goes into the Torah, and the deeper a person learns, the deeper a person understands, and the more that a person strives to understand deeply, so then the more, the higher the madrega, the higher the tikkun, the bigger the learning is, so to speak. So that's what he spoke about last week, was like the different parts of Torah, like pshat and sod and iyun and those types of things. And now and Dalid, where we're continuing, is going to explain to us the different parts of the Torah, meaning not like the different levels of depth of the Torah, but the Torah has many different parts to it. But simply like Orach Chaim, Yoredeya, Choshen Mishpat, right? There's so many different aspects of halacha, aspects of life, aspects of the world that are covered in the Torah. So that's what he's going to address now. The Chelkei HaTorah. So Dalit. Va'amnam zulas zosa hadraga animtzeis legmul hishtadlus bnei ha'adam ba kishiuro ha'amiti. So now to understand this, in addition to what we just said previously, that there are different layers, different levels of reward, and different levels of elevation that a person can achieve by accessing and learning the different levels of the Torah. So aside from that, there's another type of separation of the Torah. I guess the way that I picture this is sort of depth and breadth. Like until now, the previous Seifim, we're talking about the depth of Torah, right? There's like the surface depth of Torah, then there's a deeper level and a deeper level, and a person has the ability to access Torah on all of those levels. However, the deeper a person goes, the higher the level, so to speak. I guess like now we're inverting the metaphor, higher being deeper. So the deeper a person goes into the Torah, the higher the level is, and the more the person is going to get out of it. But now we're talking about the not the depth, but the breadth of Torah, the halakim of Torah that's sort of split up, and each of these lateral parts also contains all of that depth. But now he's going to explain why Torah is so broad. Okay, because it has everything in it that the Bria needs for its tikkun, right? Meaning the whole universe, the whole world is created in a state that is not yet mitukan, like we've been discussing throughout the Sefer, but we have the ability to fix the world, to be mitakein the world, to be mashlim the world through our avoda. So because Torah, and as we're going to see tonight, is one of the most fundamental forms, or the most fundamental form of avoda that we have, so Torah is going to have the ability to affect every single aspect of the Bria. I think we mentioned this, previously. Whereas, as opposed to every other mitzvah, where again, let's just say totally as a mashal, as a metaphor, this piece of the thumb, the mitzvah that corresponds, to this piece of the thumb is a certain mitzvah, and in order for this part of me to be shalem, again, in a metaphorical sense, I have to make sure that I perform the mitzvah of truma, which taking trumos off of my food, because that's the mitzvah that corresponds to here. And so Torah, since Torah is going to be something that's going to have the ability to be besaki in the whole world, so whereas every other mitzvah has its own specific place that it makes a tikkun, Torah, the mitzvah itself, has the ability to be betaki in everything, because everything in the universe that is discussed in the Torah has the ability to be fixed through learning Torah about that thing, right? So therefore Torah has the ability to do what we can't do, right? For example, again, we can't perform karbanos today. We can't, do the mitzvos of the Kohen Gadol in the Beis Hamikdash. So how are those tikkunim going to happen in the world? It's going to happen by people learning the Torah of those mitzvos. That's what we're going to see now. There's no part of the universe, there's no part of the world. Shelo yitukan al yado v'yushlam chelek bechelkei klal habriya. I said it wrong. I'm sorry. I said it wrong. There's no part of the Torah. Let me just read this again. Ad she'ein chelek mimena. There's no part of the Torah shelo yitukan al yado, that something won't be fixed through it. Again, like it's a double negative, so meaning that every single part of the Torah fixes something. V'yeshulam chelek mechelkei klal habriya, and some part of the bria is being completed, is being mushlam, is becoming shalem, because of this Torah that I'm learning. V'nimtza sharotza lavod lifnei boro avoda shlema. So now he's going to say something very, that follows from this, right? A person, we are all limited, right? For example, right, men are men and women are women, so that automatically changes the access that we have to certain mitzvos. There's certain mitzvos that are only for women, and certain mitzvos that are only for men. Certain mitzvos that are only for kohanim. Certain mitzvos that are only for the times of the Beis Hamikdash. Certain mitzvos that only could be taken in Eretz Yisrael. Certain, all different aspects of the Torah and the mitzvos that are not accessible to a person as an individual. However, through the Torah, a person can access all of that shleimos. So a person who really wants to be shalem in their avoda, so that person, has to realize that in my life and experience, I am very limited in the amount of shleimos that I'm able to achieve. Now, again, obviously, in our own realm, every person can achieve, full shleimus, and we can be masaking ourselves and fix everything and do everything that we need to do. And there's plenty of work to be done there, right? There's no question about it. However, a person who sees beyond that and says, "Wow, and not only do I have the ability to be metakein myself, but I have the ability to go beyond that and be metakein all parts of the world," right? As he's saying, "Nimtza shaharotza lavo d'fnei boro avoda shlema," right? A person who wants to take this on, a person who wants to say, yeah, I want to try to create, bring into this world as much shlemos as I possibly can. So a person has to learn all the different parts of the Torah, and this, this is why there's no such thing as saying like, oh, well, like, we should only be learning the Torah that's practical for today. Yes, definitely that should come first, right? Because what's practical for today is not only the Torah aspect of it, like we're seeing here, but it's also the practicality. It also teaches me, shows me, enlightens me, guides me, inspires me how I'm supposed to live, how I'm supposed to make shlemus in my life and in the world physically, right? But beyond that, a person has access to create way, way, way more shlemus learning the Torah. And this is why you can have a person who says, wow, I want to devote myself to this full time, right? Because really I can be mashlim more this way, right? I can accomplish more shlemus, make more shlemus in the world this way by learning more Torah and addressing more of the parts of the Torah than I would be able to do on my own, because I'm not going to be a doctor and a farmer and a dayan on Beis Din and a kohen. But if I sit and learn for decades and I learn the Torah from all of those parts, so then I am going to be all of those things. I will be creating the shlemus in the universe as if I did all of those things. There's a picture from David's bar mitzvah this past time. I see that. Cute. Okay. So that's the idea of Torah. And therefore, there's nothing to say like, so I mean, it's silly for me to learn karbanos. It's silly for me to learn this, or for me to learn about that. No, it's not silly for you to learn about anything. And this not, this is men, women, boys. This is like, for everybody. Anything that we can learn about in the Torah, to the extent that I have the ability to do so that I should do it. So that I can be playing the part of bringing a tikkun to the world on a much, much greater level than just me and what I can access physically around me. Okay. Right? And this is why Chazal say the following. Right? Now, this is, an interesting, his explanation of this. The olam yeshalish adam yamav, right? Chazal say the following. The Gemara says that a person should always split up his life into threes. Yeshalish adam yamav. He should split up his life into three. Shlish b'mikra, shlish b'mishnah, shlish b'gemara. A third in psukim, in Tanakh, a third in Mishnah. Now, Mishnah doesn't just mean, it doesn't mean Mishnah like Shisha Sidri Mishnah, like Mishnayos. Mishnah means a simple understanding of the Torah, a simple understanding of the halachos, and Gemara means a deeper understanding. Gemara means a real iyun understanding. So basically, he's saying a person should split up their life into three. A third should be understanding the chumash, the psukim. A third should be understanding halacha, and a third should be going deeper. Okay, that's what he says. And then if you do this, and now you've taken in all the parts of the Torah. And the idea is that we should split up our time so that at least I somehow try to get to everything at some point. At least I somehow can touch on everything. Right? Imagine a person who learns Daf Yomi, right? So he's going through the entire Gemara. That's like basically all of this in one place. That's what the poskim say. Halach al Maisa. A person who learns Gemara, so they really have all of this together because the Gemara includes in it psukim and explains them. The Gemara includes in it the basic halachos, and the Gemara includes in it the obviously what we call Gemara, which is the deeper learning. Right, so a person who learns Daf Yomi, so that person is creating a tremendous tikkun in the world, right? Because over the course of 7 whatever years it is, so they have mamash, touched on. Now, of course, they can't go deeply into it, like he said earlier. They can't be ma'amik and get the depth to the same degree. However, a person is able to learn and take into their system and speak the words of Torah, like we're going to see in a second. And all of these things are actually creating a shleimus in the world. They're actually creating a metzius of tikkun in these areas, again, that are parts of a person that nobody would have any access to. Right? And therefore, when a person has a piece in all of it. Now, this is very, very important, and this is one of the. It's hard. I don't want to call it a failing because that indicates that there's something or someone responsible. Because I don't know that there's another way around it. But this is one of the massive pitfalls, let's say, of today's educational system. Is that there's really very little room for any variation among the people, right? Among the humans, the students who are there. So I'm saying particularly in the boys' educational system, everybody's expected to learn, Chumash at the same age until the same age that they're expected to learn Mishnah, and the same age that they're all expected to learn Gemara. And the kids who are smarter and ready for it earlier are frustrated earlier, and the kids who are slower and can't pick it up, they get frustrated when it gets time, and it's a very difficult system. As it's hard to have any sort of mass system that doesn't do that to some degree, right? But it really should be that each person is able to approach Torah and learn Torah and develop their relationship with learning Torah in an individualized way, and not that everybody is sort of crammed into the same system of how to be learning and what to be focusing on. Again, there's a certain basic thing, like he said, because I'll say split it up into threes, right? But now what he says is extremely important. the amount that each person invests into each part of Torah. Ro'i shemadid lefi mashu ha'adam. So that's very important. That is, each person has to, do that for themselves. Ulefi kol hamikrim hakorim oso, and not only based on who I am and what my abilities are, but based on my life circumstances. Right, a person, can't devote himself to the same type of learning when they don't have financial responsibilities of children and life and all of these types of things, to when a person has to work and make a parnasa, and all of a person has less time and less ability and less head space, mental kohos to do this. So this is, every person, kafi who they are and kafi where they are in life, has to make the most of their learning of Torah. But how that works for each person, and this goes for men and women. I asked this specifically to Rabbi Spinner, and he said this applies to women just the same as to men. There's no difference. Ramchal doesn't say there's any difference. Women have the same ability to be metaken through learning Torah and through trying to understand as much Torah as they can, as you can. And like I said, yes, so we always first focus on practical Torah, because that's like the most important part, and that's the most that we get the most out of in the most apparent way. However, there's what to be gained from all parts of Torah for everybody, and that includes men, women. Everybody has Torah accessible to them on their own level, but the amount, right? That's each person has to know for themselves. And what I was able to learn, the way I was able to learn in my early 20s is not the way that I was learning in my early 40s, and not the way that I'm learning now. And everything changes over time. There's a sefer called Maimer HaChachma, not Maimer HaChachma, Derech Hashem, which is another sefer from Ramchal. Maybe we'll get to that also sometime. Well, okay, that would be amazing if we could learn through all the Sifrei Ramchal, just the Niglas one. Okay, Mirz Hashem. Okay, so that's very important for a person to realize. Okay, so what he's told us just now is should give you encouragement, right? That when you have a feeling that you want to learn something, or you're interested in learning something, and again, this is in English, in Hebrew, and anything that is addressing Torah. So to realize that that's not just stam, you're not just like doing something nice and gaining some insight. It's a big deal what you're doing. If you learn a Dvar Torah from a sefer on the parsha, and it's talking about Ben Sorer Romora, the wayward son who goes off the derech, but you're learning that Torah and you're thinking about it, or you say it over at the Shabbat, right? So you are part of what you are doing is being metakein that concept of that in the world, and whatever that corresponds to in the world, right? Even though it's not something that's practically applicable the way that we say. Okay, fine. Okay, hey, Tanoi Halimud, a Talmud. Okay, but now how is this Torah supposed to be learned? Right? Is it okay? I remember when I was a kid. I doubt that these people exist anymore today, mamash. But when I was a kid, I remember my rebbeim, used to always talk about this, about the types of people that would sit with a Gemara and a cigarette on a Shabbos afternoon and learn, right? And meaning that they were not religious, they didn't really believe in the Torah, they didn't really believe in Hashem, they wouldn't be keeping Shabbos, but they got so much enjoyment, intellectual enjoyment from learning Gemara, and it was so profound and deep that they would do it for enjoyment, but not because of any spiritual connection to it, because they would be with a cigarette on a Shabbos learning Gemara. So that's not the type of learning that's going to accomplish what we're talking about. So now the Ramchal is going to explain to us, how the learning is supposed to be happening. However, there's a number of criteria, tanayim, like prerequisites that exist in the way that we learn in order for us to accomplish what we're talking about here. Okay, now what is that? Hayira b'talmud atzmo. A person has to have, and he's going to explain all of this, but a person has to have a sense of awe for the Torah itself, for the learning itself, a sense of respect, that this is not just history, lahavdil, or philosophy or math or something. This is something different, as he's going to explain second. Yeah, the tikkun hamaisa b'chol ace, and also I desire to be fixing myself and working on myself all the time. right? And that's like we said before, let's say even those guys who are smoking on Shabbos at JTS, so Jewish Theological Seminary, that's like the conservative YU version in America. So they may have had tremendous respect for the Torah. They may have even had that, but they were not trying to fix themselves. There was no desire to be using the Torah as a spiritual vehicle to help me get better, right? That's not what it was about. It was just like, wow, this is really interesting, and this is going to help sharpen my mind and make me smarter, and that type of thing. So that's not going to do it. There has to be an awe of the Torah itself, and there has to be a drive that's happening inside that I want to be better through this. Okay, now what does this mean? This is very powerful. Now, what we're going to see now. What is so powerful about Torah? What is it? Why is it that somebody sits for hours a day shuckling and just saying the words of Tehillim, maybe not even understanding it? Why is it that thousands and thousands of people sit around the world and try to squeeze every minute out of Torah that they can? What is it? What is the koch Torah? Hine kol kocha shel Torah eino ela b'ma. It's only because shekashar v'tala yisbarach shemo es hashpa'aso hayakara ba. Because Hashem bound up His shefa in the Torah, right? The shefa of Hashem. That's again this concept we've spoken many times about. We call this or, we call it shefa, we call it ha'aras panim, whatever we want to refer to it as, the idea of this emanation from Hashem that's coming to us, that is activated through the performance of the mitzvahs, right? When we do a mitzvah, so we're bringing that shefa in the world. That's what's bringing in the shleimus itself, right? That shefa is creating the situation of shleimus that is happening through the mitzvahs that we do. So Hashem, through the words of Torah, He infused His shefa into them, right? Until what? That through just speaking the words of Torah, and just thinking about it, right? A person doesn't even need to speak in order for this to happen, right? I could be walking on the street and thinking about what I had been learning, thinking about an idea, thinking about a concept, and that use of my brain, right? That use of my koach, of taking my seichel and using it to process and think about a concept in Torah. It's bringing down this shefa from Shemayim. It's bringing down this hashpah, right? This incredible power that Hashem wove into the words of Torah, that Hashem, connected inherently to the concepts of Torah. When a human being engages with those words, or engages just mentally with those concepts, that is tapping into and bringing down into the world the most powerful form of shefa that we can access. However, without this idea, if not for this concept of Hashem having tied His shefa into the words of Torah, this is really very jarring, but it's going to say right now. But if not for the fact that Hashem infused Torah specifically with His shefa, Torah would be just like anything else. Now, but wait a second, he says, like any other asek, like any other thing that you're into, or any other sifrei chachma, any other intellectual pursuit. Right? But meaning, even though the Torah teaches me how to live the life correctly, right? Let's just say like this. Let's say I'm going to learn the halachos of kashrus, okay? So great, I'm going to learn kashrus. So now that I've learned kashrus, I know how to eat kosher. Okay, is that learning Torah? Is that this concept of Torah? See, he's telling us that no. I mean, yes, in reality, right? The answer is yes, because Hashem did connect His shefa to the words of Torah. But the only reason that me learning about kashrus is holy, and me learning about dental hygiene is not inherently holy is because the words of, I forgot the first example that I gave. Kashrus, right? The words of the Torah that say, just this type of animal eat, this type of animal don't eat, this has to have this scales, and this, right? Those words are not just telling me how to be healthy. It's not just a manual of spiritual hygiene, but infused in those words are the Shefa of Hashem, right? Whereas if I read a book on dental hygiene, even if I'm doing it l'shem shemayim, right? Even if I read a book on, let's say the doctors tell me, look, a person, not me, a doctor says, look, if you don't start taking better care of your teeth, you're not going to be able to perform mitzvos in the future. You're not going to be able to eat matzah on Pesach. You're not going to be able to say brachos properly, whatever. You got to start taking care of your teeth. The guy goes, oh gosh, oh boy, I better do this. I want to keep the Torah. So the guy says to him, the dentist says, here, take this book. It's a book on dental hygiene. I want you to read this book, and I want you to do every single thing it says, in there. The guy says, okay, and he takes it. Okay, so when he reads that book, is he doing a mitzvah? Absolutely, right? Absolutely. He's right? You have to take care of yourself. You can't be unhealthy. Right? We have a responsibility to do things to make sure we're able to keep the Torah, right? And if I'm not going to be able to, a person won't be able to keep the Torah because they don't have good teeth, so then they're required to do whatever necessary to set themselves up so they can keep the Torah, right? So all of those things, it's certainly a mitzvah for him to read about how to maintain his teeth. And it's certainly a mitzvah for him to actually put into action how to do it. However, what was he bringing shefa in the world through his reading and striving to understand the words of the dental hygiene magazine? No. Right? If he hit a sentence over there that was written in a complicated way and he had to look up a few words in the dictionary and he had to take a few minutes and maybe ask his friend for help to understand what are the instructions over here, exactly how is he telling me to floss, right? So again, it's a mitzvah because he's striving to do what's best for himself. He's striving to be healthy and take care of himself, and that's important for him to serve Hashem. That's all good and fine. But that struggling is not bringing shefa into the world. He's struggling to understand the definition of those words and looking it up in a dictionary and asking a person to help him with the sentence. That is not bringing shefa into the world. It's a means to an end. Okay. Now Torah would be that also, right? Torah would also be a very important means to an end, right? Like if Hashem had not infused his shefa into the words of Torah, we would still have to learn it. We would still have to spend a lot of time trying to understand it and making sure we got it clear. And we would still have to ask our teacher, our Rebbe, or our friend to translate the words for us and explain the sentences to us, right? Because we need to know what it's telling us. We need to know how to keep Shabbos. We need to know how to keep kashrus. We need to know when to say brachos and when not, right? However, that would still just be a sefer of chachma, right? Lahavdil, right? But if Torah did not have the Devar Hashem inside of it, so that learning how to keep kosher and learning how to keep Shabbos would be the same thing as learning how to maintain my teeth in a healthy way. It's a means to an end. It's a way for me to be able to keep the Torah properly, right? But there'd be nothing inherently holy about that Shabbos book, just like there'd be nothing inherently holy about a dental hygiene book or a book on, or a self-help book, like, a CBT psychology book that helps a person, reach a stage of mental equilibrium and gives a person tools how to deal with the world. Of course, it's a mitzvah to do that. Of course, a person who can help themselves be healthier mentally and emotionally is doing a mitzvah, right? But studying that and struggling to understand it is not bringing shefa into the world. Okay, so now I hope with all of this we understand what he's saying over here. That what's special about Torah is not because it teaches us how to keep the Torah. Yeah, that's also special. That's also important, right? That's also necessary. We need to know how to keep the Torah, but that's not what he's talking about here. What he's talking about here is something unique and special to the words of Torah as they were written by Hashem, given over by Chazal, written down by the Rambam and written by the Rashi and everybody else, that infused in those words, right? In those very words, other than their instructions, is Shefa. and infused in those concepts that I'm thinking about, right? Even I'm walking on the street and just reviewing in my head the concepts of kashrus, or thinking about a certain question that I saw recently, or any of these types of things. So connected to that process of haskala is shefa coming into the world, right? And if not for that, then again the Torah would be like any other instruction manual, a very important instruction manual, right? But it would only be a means to an end, not an end to itself, right? Right? Thinking about Torah would be the same as thinking about physics, thinking about philosophy, thinking about biology, right? Being amazed at how a cell works and walking around thinking about that. It would be the same thing. Right? Because the whole concept is to know what the writing is about, to understand the concept behind it. But there's nothing actually happening through that studying. There's nothing actually happening through reading that math book, right? It's just understanding the Inyan. But nefesh hakore hamedaber v'hamaskil, nothing's happening in the soul of the person who's reading or speaking or thinking. V'lo tikun l'chlal habriya, and no tikun to the whole world. Right, so the whole concept of Torah and the power of Torah is not that it's just an instruction manual. Right, on the contrary, an instruction manual would have no inherent kedusha to it. A kedusha of the Torah comes from the fact that the Dvar Hashem is inherently connected to the Shefa that Hashem brings down. Okay. So this this idea of women and men is exactly the same with this. Exactly the same. There's, the Ramchal makes no distinction. There's no, any aspect of this applies to women, just the same as men. Okay. But this hashpa that we do get now from learning Torah, the hashpa that Hashem did make inherent in the connection between Torah and the words, right? It's godliness. It's a part of Hashem. Not only that, not only is there shefa, infused in the Torah, right? Not only is a Hilchos Brachos Sefer not the same as a dental manual, a dental hygiene book, because of the shefa that is infused in it. However, it's not just any shefa; it's the highest type of shefa. It's the highest form of shefa that comes from Hashem. The type of shefa that comes through learning and thinking and speaking about Torah is the highest level of shefa that comes from Hashem. And since that's the case, now he's explaining the concept of why a person, when they're learning, why they have to have awe of the Torah, respect for the Torah that they're learning, right? Because a person, we have to realize that when we're saying these words, thinking these words, teaching these words, so we are tapping into the highest levels of Shefa, the highest levels of what Hashem allows to come into this world. That's what we're tapping into and accessing and bringing in when we're learning. That's something we have to respect. Right, that's something we have to, be like very in awe of, and realize that this is something like, huge that we're doing. It's like we're approaching Hashem. The work that I'm doing now is going all the way up. We're accessing something so high. So I have to do that with respect. I have to do that with, with a proper attitude and a proper approach. I can't do that in a, disrespectful, lackadaisical type of a way. I'm tapping into the most powerful, high emanations that Hashem provides us with. Right, so that's something I need to do with appropriate respect. Right, a person has to feel like, wow, we're so small compared to Hashem, and be, awed by Hashem's godless, and to rejoice, to have a sense of simcha in learning that we're zocha to this. Ach barada k'mo shekasavnu, right? There's this concept of gilu barada that Hashem wants us to ashreinu matov chalkeinu. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to rejoice and be so appreciative and thankful and love the Torah and to love our learning of the Torah, and at the same time to we have to remember to maintain that respect. We have to remember to realize that this is something that we are touching the highest levels with, and therefore we have to treat it carefully. Yeah, v'nichlal b'zeh. What does this mean? Shelo yeshiv b'kalos rosh. Not when you're learning Torah, you don't sit around in a joking way, just lounging around and whatever. V'lo yinhag shum minhag bizayon. Not to do like disrespectful things. Lo b'dvarel v'lo b'safarel. Certainly not to be disrespectful of any of the words of Torah. Not to disrespect the books, the svarim of Torah. V'yeda l'fnei mi'o minu misaseh. To recognize that we're in front of Hashem. So again, this is the idea that when we're learning to recognize we're not just reading math, we're not just reading philosophy, we are touching the Dvar Hashem, we're tapping into a very high level. And if a person who does this, right, respects the learning and realizes that we're accessing Hashem over here, then you're going to get out of that learning what you should be getting, right? Then the world is going to get and that tremendous shefa of Torah is going to come into the world. And in this person, this heavenly light, this heavenly glow, this ore is going to be mitatzim. It's going to take hold in them, and it's going to elevate the whole world. Okay, we'll finish this and then we'll stop. However, if a person learns Torah but without these prerequisites, right, then this is not going to happen. A person who approaches Torah in a cynical way, and again, not like we all have cynical thoughts from time to time. That's our Yetzer Hara. That's a part of us. But it's talking about a person here who doesn't respect the Torah. Yeah. So a person could then be dealing in Torah all the time, but really it's just like, Lahavdil, but it's like a philosophy book for him. It's not Torah. It's not doing this. Look what he says over here. And a person who thinks about the Torah, it's like he's just thinking about the world. Right? This is, it's the opposite. He'd be better off not learning. Right? A person who learns in a disrespectful way, so he'd be better off not learning. Because he's like approaching the king without appropriate respect. So you're better off not coming into the palace than coming in and disrespecting the king. And he's being lightheaded in front of his creator. While he's still standing there and talking to Hashem, and he's going to deal with other things and act in a inappropriate way. Yeah, and like everything else, right? There's levels to this also. To the extent that a person is respectful of the Torah, to the extent that a person has that proper awe, and the proper respect, so that will affect the preciousness of the Torah. So again, once we have this prerequisite, which hopefully we all have, so then all of our Torah learning fits into this idea. All of our Torah learning is, coming from a good place. However, there's still madregos, there's still levels, right? A person can develop a much deeper level of respect, a much more profound level of awe of the Torah and of Hashem. So then that's going to tap into an even deeper level of shefa. Right? So the more that he respects it, the more he's in awe, the more he's appreciating what the Torah is, so then, or she, right, then the more that awe is brought into the world. Okay, so that's what we see tonight, this idea of the breadth of Torah also affecting the world in different ways, how Torah has the ability to affect everything, even the mitzvahs that we don't have access to. And now he's explaining the idea of the prerequisites, the Tanayim, the criteria in order to learn Torah. And the most important thing is to have that realization that when we're learning, it's not just another book, but it's the shefa of Hashem, kashur to the Dvar Hashem, right? That Hashem infused the words of Torah with a certain power, And that power, is what brings the shefa into the world, and at the same time, that's what demands a certain level of respect and a certain level of deference, and not to take it lightly. Okay, I see one more question on the chat. Let me see what's there. Thank you. Yeah, so right. So this is also the idea of learning Torah. So maybe as we get deeper into this chapter, we'll see more of why there is a difference between men and women when it comes to this. But when it comes to this idea of shefa and everything that we're saying now, the answer is no. There's no difference. A woman who focuses on Torah and wants to understand it and learns it and tries to learn it and tries to understand it, so she's bringing in the shefa just the same way. It happens to be men have a demand from us that we have to work on doing this, whereas women don't have that requirement. And Mirza Hashem will get to that along the way also. Okay, have a great Shabbos, everybody. Feel well. And
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a great Shabbos.
Where are the questions posted?
Somebody ask me something?
Where are the questions being posted? I didn't see any questions.
Yes, no.
Huh?